When the Grand Hotel at Scarborough opened in 1867, it had 365 bedrooms, one for every day of the year, 52 chimneys, one for every week, 12 floors, one for every month. It was the largest hotel in Europe, 6 million bricks on a cliff above a sea. Britain had only just learned to love. Today, it is run by the company voted the worst in the country, 10 years running. This is the town that taught Britain to go to the seaside and then stood on the cliff and watched the world stop coming. Because Scarborough did not just happen to have a seaside, Scarborough invented it. Before this town, the British coast was a working edge, a place of fishermen and salt and drowning, somewhere you laboured, not somewhere you went to be happy. And then a strange idea took hold here, one that would eventually empty the cities every August and line 1,000 miles of British coastline with piers and promenades. The idea was simple, and it was this: the sea could heal you. For 3 centuries, people came to this one stretch of Yorkshire to drink the water, to breathe the air, to be cured, and to be seen being cured. And then, one wet morning in 1993, a 4-star hotel on these very cliffs began to slide into the sea, and the whole country watched it fall live on the evening news. Hold that picture in your mind, because we are going to come back to it. The sea that built this town is now taking it back, a little more each year. That is the paradox at the centre of Scarborough, and everything that follows lives inside it. It began, as these things often do, by accident, with a woman and a stain on a rock. Around 1626, a local woman named Elizabeth Farrow was walking below the cliffs at the south end of the town when she noticed water trickling from the base of the rock, staining the stone a deep reddish brown. She tasted it. It was bitter, faintly metallic, and it did something she had not expected. In the polite phrasing of the day, the water opened the belly. What she had found, we would now say plainly, was a spring loaded with magnesium sulfate. What her neighbours decided they had found was a miracle. Word spread the way it always does, faster than sense. People began arriving to drink the bitter water, convinced it could cure indigestion, melancholy, jaundice, and every private complaint too delicate to name aloud. Then, in 1660, a physician called Dr. Whitty published a book praising the Scarborough waters, and that book did for the town what a viral post might do now. The visitors came in a flood, and Dr. Whitty gave them instructions. Drink 2½ pints of the water each morning, he wrote, then take a long walk along the sands, and repeat the whole ritual for a month or more. Read that again, and notice what has just been invented there. The cure is almost beside the point. What is new is the walk itself, the stroll along the sand, the sea air taken in for its own sake, the coast reimagined as a place you go to feel better rather than a place you go to work. Within a lifetime, the wealthy were no longer content just to drink the water. They were bathing in the sea, and by 1735, the beach had filled with bathing machines, little wooden huts on wheels that let a respectable lady change and wade into the waves unseen. The men, less troubled by modesty, simply dived in naked from the fishing boats. The British seaside holiday, that whole institution of buckets and spades and cold water and stubborn hope, was being assembled here, one improbable custom at a time. For a long while this stayed a pleasure for the rich, because reaching Scarborough was slow and expensive, and only the leisured had the time. Then the railway came. In 1845, a line opened from York, and the town it reached would never be the same. Now the mills of Leeds and the whole West Riding could empty their workers onto the platform in a single afternoon. Scarborough boomed. Grand terraces climbed the cliffs, ornamental gardens were cut into the slopes, and down at the shore, the town began to build things no British resort had ever built before. In 1875, to carry visitors up and down the steep cliff between the esplanade and the spar below, Scarborough opened the South Cliff Lift, the first passenger cliff railway in the whole of Britain. 2 little cars counterbalanced on a cable, and here is the strangest detail of all: they were driven by seawater. On opening day, 1,400 people paid a single old penny each just for the novelty of the ride. The spar itself, at the foot of that cliff, had become the most popular music venue anywhere in the country outside London, a place of orchestras and evening gowns and slow promenading crowds. 4 more cliff lifts would follow. Scarborough was no longer a spa for the few. It was a machine for delivering happiness to the many, and it was making a fortune. And in the middle of all that pleasure, almost unnoticed, the town had already given a home to the seed of its own undoing. Back in 1829, Scarborough had opened the Rotunda, one of the first purpose-built museums anywhere in the world. Its elegant curved gallery, designed to a suggestion by a man named William Smith. Smith is remembered now as the father of English geology. He was the first person to understand that the layers of rock beneath Britain could be read like the pages of a book, each stratum in its order, and he drew the first geological map of the country. He built his little temple to the reading of rock here on this coast, in the very town whose own rock would one day turn against it. But that reckoning lay more than a century in the future, and nobody in 1829 was listening to the cliffs. Before the boom reached its peak, though, this town received a visitor whose short story sits at the very heart of what Scarborough was selling. In the spring of 1849, a young woman arrived from the Yorkshire moors, gravely ill. Her name was Anne Bronte, the youngest of the 3 sisters, author of Agnes Grey and the tenant of Wildfell Hall. She had tuberculosis, she was dying, and her doctor had told her that a change of air might help. Anne did not think of a warmer country or a mountain sanatorium. She thought of Scarborough, a place she loved, a place with a reputation for making the sick well again. She arrived on the 25th of May with her sister Charlotte and a friend, and took rooms at a boarding house called Wood's Lodgings, high on the cliff above the bay. She bought a ticket for the spa. She walked gently in the fresh sea air the town had spent 200 years advertising as a tonic. And 3 days later, on the 28th of May, she died, aged just 29. She was the only one of the family not buried at home in Haworth. They laid her instead in the churchyard of St Mary's, on the hillside beneath the castle, with the sea below her. Her gravestone, carved in grief and in haste, records her age wrongly to this day. It says 28. She was 29. And here is the detail that should stop you. That boarding house where Anne Bronte came to be healed and instead died stood on the exact patch of ground where, 18 years later, they would raise the largest hotel in Europe. The town that had promised to make the sick well again could not save her. And on the very spot where its most famous invalid took her last breath, Scarborough built the grandest, most confident monument to the healing power of the seaside that Britain had ever seen. That monument was the Grand Hotel, and it is worth walking into while it still gleams. Work began in 1863 to a design by the Hull architect Cuthbert Broderick, the man who had already given the city of Leeds its magnificent town hall. The money ran out partway through, the first company collapsed, and the half-built shell had to be rescued before it was finally finished in 1867. The final cost was around £100,000, something close to 11.5 million in today's money. 6 million bricks, 40,000 cubic feet of stone. The public rooms alone were laid with 11.5 miles of carpet. Broderick shaped the whole building like the letter V in honour of Queen Victoria, and then he wrapped it around a single quiet idea: time. 4 towers for the 4 seasons, 12 floors for the 12 months, 52 chimneys for the 52 weeks, and 365 bedrooms, one to answer every day on the calendar. It was, in effect, a working almanac you could sleep inside, a vast brick calendar standing over the North Sea. In the bedrooms, a guest could turn a tap and choose fresh water or salt, so that the healing sea itself could be piped straight to the bath. When it opened, the newspapers called it the largest and handsomest hotel in Europe. Winston Churchill stayed here. So did a future king and a future prime minister. And much later, 4 young men from Liverpool called the Beatles. This was the summit, Scarborough standing at the very top of the world it had built. So hold on to the height of it, the calendar in brick, the salt water in the taps, the famous faces on the sweeping staircase, because from here the story turns, and it turns first with a sound that no one on that seafront was expecting. It came on the morning of the 16th of December, 1914. Britain had been at war for 4 months, but the war was still a thing that happened elsewhere, in France, in the newspapers. Then, just before 8 o'clock, out of the mist over the bay, 3 German warships appeared. Two of them, the Derflinger and the Von der Tann, turned their guns on the town. For roughly half an hour, about 500 shells fell on Scarborough. They tore the roofs from houses, gutted shops, and smashed the old castle barracks so badly it had to be pulled down. And they struck the Grand Hotel itself, where, as one historian tells it, elderly guests were reading their morning letters over genteel breakfast tables when the shells came through the walls. When the smoke cleared, 17 people in Scarborough were dead. Ordinary people in their kitchens and their beds, one of them a baby of just 14 months. It was the first time in the war that enemy guns had killed civilians on British soil, and the shock of it ran through the whole country. In the months that followed, 2 words were printed on recruitment posters from one end of Britain to the other. Remember Scarborough. The town that had stood for holidays and healing had become, overnight, a symbol of everything the enemy might do to you at home. There was a crack in the idyll now. The hotel was repaired and the visitors came back, but something in the town's idea of itself had been shaken loose, and the deeper danger to Scarborough was never going to come from across the sea at all. It was going to come from the sky, and from a quiet change in what people wanted that no warship could have predicted. If you have enjoyed this walk through the rise of Britain's first resort, stay with me, because the thing that finally hollowed this town out is stranger and sadder than any bombardment, and it begins with something as small as a cheap seat on an aeroplane. For a while after the war, the great British seaside holiday reached its absolute peak. Through the 1950s and into the 60s, the train still emptied the northern cities onto the sands each summer. Leeds came to Scarborough by tradition, the way its parents and grandparents had. The arcades glowed, the theatres filled, the boarding houses hung out their vacancy signs, and then the world offered British families a different bargain, and they took it almost overnight. From the 1970s, cheap package holidays put the Mediterranean within reach of ordinary working families for the very first time. For roughly the price of a fortnight in a Yorkshire boarding house, you could now fly to Spain, to a beach where the sun was not a hope, but a guarantee. Why shiver through a grey August in Scarborough, huddled behind a windbreak, waiting for a gap in the cloud, when the same money bought you a warm terrace in Benidorm? The question answered itself in millions of homes, year after year. The seaside holiday that Scarborough had invented, the whole idea of the coaster's escape, had been quietly overtaken by a warmer, cheaper version of itself 1,000 miles to the south. Everything this town had spent 3 centuries perfecting, another coastline now offered for less, with the sunshine thrown in for free. The visitors thinned. The grand hotels along the coast slid into disrepair or were carved up into bedsits, and the people who kept coming and the people who stayed tended to be older and often poorer, until the resort earned the bleak nickname that clung to towns like it up and down the coast, the Costa Geriatrica. And then, as if the decline needed a single unforgettable picture, the cliffs themselves gave way. Now we come back to the image from the very beginning. On the south cliff stood the Holbeck Hall Hotel, an elegant 4-star Victorian building set in wide gardens, with a green lawn running some 70 metres out towards the cliff edge and the sea beyond. In early June of 1993, after weeks of heavy rain had soaked deep into the clay beneath it, the ground began to move. A guest woke on the morning of the 4th of June to find that most of the garden had simply vanished in the night. The lawn, the rose beds, gone, and the new edge of the cliff now just yards from the walls. The hotel was evacuated, and over the next 2 days, in front of the world's cameras, around 1 million tons of sodden earth slumped towards the beach, cutting the 60-metre cliff back by 70 metres and carrying the building down with it. The whole nation watched it happen. In one moment that stayed with everyone who saw it, the hotel's chimney stack toppled live on Yorkshire television, on air, as the presenter Richard Whiteley was in the middle of describing the building's plight. Piece by piece, the seaward wing broke away and crashed down the hillside in clouds of dust. What was left standing was too dangerous to keep and had to be demolished. 120 years of Victorian grandeur undone in 48 hours by nothing more violent than rain and the slow arithmetic of the cliff it was built on. Remember William Smith and his little museum of rock. This was the coast finally collecting on a debt the town never knew it owed. The cliffs that gave Scarborough its famous views were now swallowing its grandest buildings whole. Which brings us back up the coast, at last, to the Grand Hotel, and to what became of Scarborough's calendar in brick. The great building still stands over the South Bay, and from a distance, in the right light, it can still look like a palace. But in time, it passed to a budget chain called Britannia Hotels, and under that ownership, the largest and handsomest hotel in Europe became something else entirely. Britannia has now been voted the worst hotel chain in Britain for 10 years in a row by the Consumer Group, which guests have called the grand tired and dirty and sad. One review was headlined simply, "The worst hotel in the world." Another said it made faulty towers look like the Ritz. At the end of 2021, after a public outcry over the state of it, the review site TripAdvisor took the extraordinary step of freezing all new reviews of the hotel. The calendar of bedrooms, the salt water in the taps, the sweeping staircase, all of it still there, and all of it a ghost of what it was. And the town around that hotel tells the same story in colder figures. Scarborough is now the most deprived part of the whole of North Yorkshire. More than 85% of the county's most deprived residents live in this one district. The gap in life expectancy between its richest and poorest neighbourhoods runs to some 11 years. There are wards here where more than a third of the children are growing up in poverty. The population is old and getting older, with the number of people over 70 set to rise by around 64% by the middle of the next decade, while more than a fifth of working age adults have no qualifications at all. The resort that once sold youth and health and escape to the entire country is now, by nearly every measure that matters, among the oldest and hardest pressed towns in England. Here, honesty demands a pause, because the title of this video is a provocation, and you deserve the truth underneath it. People do still visit Scarborough. The beach still fills on a hot bank holiday. The pandemic sent a fresh wave of British holidaymakers back to their own coast, and there are people working hard right now to give the town a future. But walk the seafront out of season, and the truth is difficult to miss. The crowds are thinner and greyer than they were, the season shorter, the grand old buildings held upright on a fraction of their former confidence. What survives here largely survives on nostalgia, on the memory of a promise the modern world stopped believing, and no town can live forever on the memory of what it used to mean. So picture that hotel on the cliff one last time. A vast brick almanac with a room for every day of the year, most of them now cheap and worn, standing on the ground where a dying young novelist once came looking for a cure the sea could not give her. Picture the churchyard above the bay, where Anne Bronte still lies beneath a stone that gets her age wrong. Picture the cliff a little further along the coast, still moving, still coming in, one wet winter at a time. Scarborough taught Britain that the sea could save you. Its whole tragedy is that, in the end, the sea did not save the town that first believed it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, because there are more places like this one. Whole towns built on a single beautiful idea that the world later walked away from. And if you want another, right now, YouTube reckons you'll like the one already waiting on your screen. Go on, give it a click.